Good morning and aloha. My name is Rob Hack. I'm from the Hawaii Pacific Export Council. We are a local nonprofit here in Honolulu that trains and teaches small companies, medium-sized companies, and even large companies about exporting. We are one of 61 district export councils in the United States. Just 2 years ago, we won the District Export Council of the Year award, which was great and big news for Hawaii too. Our exports from Hawaii are growing a lot, and that's why we're here to help you. We put on a series of seminars and workshops every year. We typically change up the program year by year, but this event today, Export University 101, is sort of our flagship event, and we welcome you to that. We are able to put on these seminars because of a very generous grant that we receive from DBET. And DBET in turn receives a grant from SBA in Washington, D.C. And we thank both of those organizations very much. In a few minutes, we'll hear from DBET about the program. So I'd like to make one quick disclaimer. We have an online audience, which is a webinar. We have the live audience here, and then we record these videos for posterity, and we put them on our YouTube channel. So the disclaimer is if you ask a question, and we certainly want you to ask questions, your face or your voice may eventually wind up on our YouTube channel. So please know that in advance. Okay, thank you all for coming. We would also like to thank the Foreign Trade Zone, which is this great facility which allows us to use the room to put on these seminars. Restrooms are just outside to the right. We'll take a break in approximately 90 minutes or 2 hours from now, and hopefully we'll be all wrapped up by 12:30 or 1 p.m. Okay, any questions before we get started? Great, so our first speaker today is Mark Ritchie. He's from DBET, and he's going to go through the HiSTEP program very briefly in 10 minutes or so. And if there's any questions, please wait till the end of Mark's talk and we can answer those questions.
Okay,
please.
Great. Thank you, Rob. Aloha, everybody. Thank you for coming out today on a rainy, windy day. So my name is Mark Ritchie. I'm a branch manager at DBET, and our division is responsible for the HiSTEP program, which stands for the Hawaii Trade Expansion Program. And what DBET does every year is we have to put in a proposal for a grant that we get from SBA. And it's a competitive grant. Most states get them, but we have to show kind of results from previous years and then put together a sort of a whole program on what our state wants to do to try to increase our exports. And that's what SBA is sort of judging us on. And as Rob said, this is, it takes a village, and so we have a lot of partners. So DBET gets the grant from the SBA, and we've been pretty successful over the past 5 years. This year we have over $500,000 to spend, and that could include in a lot of areas, which I'll go into. But we work with a lot of partners, and so it's definitely a team approach. And so our partners are the SBA Hawaii District Office, the Hawaii Pacific Export Council, which is Rob and his team. And I think we have Brenda back there, who previous head of, we have a new head now, but 23rd starts. Okay, so you're still head, good, okay. And, can you go back to the rest? Let me just finish. And then the U.S. Department of Commerce, the Export Assistance Center, and John Holman will be here today. Small Business Development Centers. I don't think we have anybody from the Small Business Development Center here, but that is Joe Burns, Lori Hiramatsu, and some other people there. And then also on the neighbor islands, they have offices. Innovate Hawaii, that's part of HTDC, and they are the folks that help you with scaling up on your operations and your manufacturing. And they're going to be doing a session in about 2 weeks, I think on the 20th, which I think you want to put that on your calendars, because if you're going to be trying to increase your exports, you're going to have to know operationally and from manufacturing, if you're doing a manufactured product, how you're going to be able to scale up to meet increased orders. Hawaii Department of Agriculture, they also do trade shows just like DBET does, and we sort of have some of their information out there on the table. Foreign Trade Zone, where we are right now, and then the Patsy Mink Center for Business and Leadership, and they're helping us and assisting us as well. Okay, now the next slide, please. So the proposal we put in, and the way we've been doing this for about the past 5 years, is we really want to try to address the needs of the business community in terms of scaling up, understanding exporting, and then actually getting your business to the point where you have successful export development programs and you're increasing your exports from the state of Hawaii. So there's basically, we try to address things from companies that are just starting out, that have never really exported before, all the way on the other side to companies that are already successful exporters, already in certain markets, but are looking to expand exports in certain markets or go into new markets. And so all of our program tries to address everything from this side all the way through to successful exporters. So the three components are sort of training and business mentoring, and that's what we're doing right now. This is one of our training sessions. We do one of these every month. This month we have 2 of them, but it's to try to cover a lot of export topics and to do a lot of Q&A and things. And each year we pick about 8 to 10 topics that we do, and you can see all the flyers we have out on the table there. So definitely take some of those and sign up for the ones that you're interested in attending. And each year we pick 10 topics, I think, or 8 topics I think would be appropriate for this year. But if there's a topic that you're interested in but we're not offering it, you can go into our archive sessions, because maybe in previous years we've already done a session on that. Let me give you an example. We did one on Canada once, and I think in previous years, so you could actually go to the DBED website, which we'll list at the end of this, and then see that topic dealt with if we're not covering it this year. Second component is trade shows that we do, where the state actually will do a pavilion, a Hawaii pavilion, and then we recruit companies to go into a particular trade show. The largest trade show we do, where we take like over 60 Hawaii companies, is the Tokyo International Gift Show, which is an annual show in Tokyo. Usually it's in the summer. This year, because of the Olympics, it's going to be later on in the fall. But that's the largest show we do. But then we also do smaller shows. We do a life science show. My colleague right now, Jamie Lum, who can't be here, but she'll probably be here at the next session, she's at Surf Expo, which we have 12 Hawaii companies that do surf-related products. It's at a global trade show in Orlando, Florida. Right now, I think they're just finishing up. And then the last component is where we actually offer companies individual assistance. Not so much to go into one of the pavilions, but if we only do maybe 5 to 6 different pavilions each year, but if you're in a sector where we're not doing a pavilion, we can actually help defer your trade show costs for booth space, travel, and some other things. And I'll go into how that program works as well. So these are the 3 components, and they're meant to sort of work all together. Next slide. I'm going to go through this kind of quickly. This is just eligibility. You basically need to be sort of an eligible U.S. company, and your content should be 51% U.S. content. Because we're using federal funds, SBA funds, if you're just like importing something, this is probably not the program for you. But if you do have 51% U.S. content, then you would be eligible. And a lot of times on some of our applications, we actually have a valuation sheet, so you can sort of figure out, kind of what's your value add to sort of determine what your U.S. content is. You can't be barred from receiving federal funds for some reason. You need to be registered in good standing with the DCCA. And I don't know if a lot of you have your DCCA files all up to date. It just means that you're filing your taxes and things like that, and you have a certificate of a good standing with the department. And lastly, just you're currently up to date on all your taxes. Like we can't give you probably state monies that's coming from the federal government if you actually owe the state taxes and you're way behind on something like that. Next slide. So the export readiness part, that's the training part. That's what these sessions are. But there's also another component I want to talk about. If you go in and register for the HiSTEP program, what you're really doing is you're telling us about your company and things. And what that does is, in addition to attending, these 8 to 10 seminars we have throughout the year, you also get one-on-one mentoring from one of our partner organizations. And that would either be the Hawaii Pacific Export Council, the Patsy Mink Center for Business and Leadership, or it be from the Small Business Development Center. So they will work with you on one-on-one, get to know your company, what your needs are, and then try to help start assisting you in putting your export program together and everything else that entails. So that is a very important thing, but that process doesn't start unless you register with us, and we'll show you at the end like where you do that.
And it's free to register.
And it's free to register, and there's no charge. I mean, you have all these resources, and there's no charge for it. That's part of the HiSTEP program. So we talked about sort of the training and mentoring, and then the second component is Hawaii pavilions. And see, you can sort of have, the best way to explain this is you can see the graphics, the pictures, where we go in. We do the whole booth build out for you. We do charge for some of the shows, but it's at a extremely reduced rate. So you're able to go in, get all the support services that we offer. We even have interpreters at some shows and things like that. And it makes going into your first trade show relatively easy. Can I just do a show of hands of how many people have actually been in a trade show before, like had a booth, took product in? Okay, so we've got a smattering. How many people are just completely new to export, have never even gone to a trade show overseas? Okay, just a couple. Okay, good. We got sort of a mixture here. That's good. So that's really important. And on our website, we'll let you know about the shows. And we also have one of our flyers out there that has a list of our trade shows. Now, we have trade shows that DBED does, but also the Hawaii Department of Agriculture does shows as well. And so on all of our flyers, we're always including the ones that the Department of Ag is doing. And they have their own programs and assistance programs that sort of go along with agricultural products, but they do shows such as like Food X, a food ingredient show in Tokyo. They're doing more ag-related or food value add kind of trade shows, but we work very closely with them, and they're also part of our HiSTEP program, even though it's a separate process and things for them. How about next slide? And then the individual company assistance. Each year, we're able to offer companies up to $7,500 to help defray some of the costs of taking out a trade show booth and flights and some of the other costs associated with trade shows. I'll let you go and read sort of some of the things that we can cover in more detail. For this year, the applications were due January 6th, and so just right now, next week, the committee will be meeting. It's a competitive process, but what we're really looking for is companies that are going to spend the money wisely and are going to be successful in growing their exports as a result of this funding we're giving them. In past years, we've been able to fund about half the companies that apply. So it is competitive, and let me just walk back a little bit because this is sort of for all the money that SBA gives us. SBA, they're a tough taskmaster. They're not here right now, are they? Okay, I'll say that. But I guess it's going to be recorded. They're a tough taskmaster. What they want is they're going to give us $500,000, and then when we report back to them, they're going to want to know how much have we been able to increase our exports from the state as a whole as a result of that money. So they're looking for ROI. So when you're applying for this, what we're looking for in your application, we're asking for a 1 or 2 page export development plan. Like, what are you doing? Have you done your research? Does this make sense? We're not giving you money for exploratory trips. That's not what this is for. You already have to have your plan in place. And that's what the mentoring and that one-on-one stuff, these training sessions, that is to be able to help you kind of get your plans together so that you've increased the likelihood of being successful and being able to scale up your businesses and increase exports from the state, because that's what we're being judged on. They won't give us money the next year if we're reporting really bad results. They're going to say you're not using that money wisely. So just keep in mind that when we're sort of coming at you, asking certain questions and trying to do things, that this is the reason why, is that they want to kind of spend taxpayer dollars wisely to increase exports. Next. And then here is just some things that we can pay for. We can do shipping of products. John Holman, when he's here, asked about the Gold Key service. You can actually, sometimes that costs about $1,000. You can use this financial assistance to pay for that. They will actually put a tailored program together for you through a particular consulate overseas or an embassy, where the commercial officers there will set up meetings for certain distributors and things like that, and sort of help you get into that market. And it's called Gold Key. It takes them, you have to do this a couple months in advance. advance, but it's a very valuable service, and I think John Holman will probably mention that when he speaks from the International Trade Administration. Okay, next. And I guess we can go. Oh, and you can also do compliance testing. This is an important thing, particularly if you're in any sort of like food product or something that where there's a regulatory environment around it. In Japan, you can't just like ship some sort of food product and get it on a shelf there. They're going to want to know, you know, what are the ingredients? Is that even allowed in Japan? You know, there's a lot of regulatory hurdles you have to sort of go through. Your importer can help you with these things, and we actually have done sessions on this, but you can actually use up to $3,000 to help you get your product certified so that your importer can bring it in and then actually distribute it in a particular market.
Cosmetics too.
Cosmetics
that's
too.
A big
That's another
product
one.
from Hawaii going to Japan,
Right.
and it's treated very carefully in
Right.
the Japanese market.
Right,
There's
and
a lot of
that's another thing. You know, I talked about the pavilions. One, we're doing a new show this year, which we've been wanting to do for years because it's a natural for Hawaii, but it's the Natural Product Show. It's a global trade show. It's in Anaheim every year. It's very difficult to get into, and you have to already kind of be certified as having a natural product, and so there's some little additional hoops. So it's always been very complicated, but Hawaii has just a lot of companies that are doing natural product type things, everything from food to cosmetics and other areas. So that is a new show we're doing, but this would be something, you know, if you're trying to get in a particular market overseas, you could use the money for to try to get certified.
It's a reasonable question for a company here to ask, why would DBET be interested for exports at a show in Anaheim?
Oh, because that's a good question. We cannot just do a domestic trade show from SBA. The show has to be, it's a global trade show. It just happens to be occurring in the U.S. So they have to have like over like a third of the people there have to be like global buyers. In other words, at the Natural Product Show in Anaheim, there's people from all over the world. It is a global show. So you can meet with, you know, distributors in the European Union and Japan and from all over the world at the Natural Product Show. And just like Surf Expo, where my colleague is, it's in Orlando, Florida, but it has a huge European contingent, a lot of people from Asia, and it's surf products and things, and Hawaii has sort of a natural advantage in some of those things, and we have 12 companies that are exhibiting there. But it has to be a global show.
Great.
Next. So I already kind of got into this a little bit, but how is SBA judging us? Or, you know, when we do these things, like you might think, well, why are you doing this, or why are you doing that, or why are you coming back to me on this? It's because these are our success metrics for the HiSTEP program. It's expanded exports and revenue from exports of Hawaii-produced goods and services. Now, the services part, some people get a little bit like, what does that mean? It doesn't have to just be a hard product. It can actually be a let's say if you're an engineering company and you're going to be doing engineering work in Indonesia, and this program could help you get those contracts in Indonesia, you might be employing all the people in Hawaii that are doing the engineering work, but then it's actually being executed in Indonesia. You could apply for this HiSTEP program. So that's what I kind of mean by services. You could also be a software company. A little caveat on software. We're not looking for somebody that's just doing an app, a single person. SBA is also now just starting to really look at employment as well. So we want companies that are growing, employing people. We're an economic development agency. So we're not here just to help one individual, you know, do one app. We're here to have somebody grow a company where they're actually going to be hiring programmers and employing people in Hawaii. So maybe kind of think about that in the back of your mind. We're looking for an overall number of, maybe just go back one.
Sorry.
Oops, that's okay. Larger overall number and larger percentage of Hawaii-based companies that are active in global markets. So that's why you might think, oh, I'm just a newbie. I'm just like starting out. You're not interested in me. No, we're really interested in you because it might not be this year or next year, but we can start the process. So in 3 years, you're actually exporting your product and you're in a new market. So we are definitely, as I told you, the whole continuum from people just starting out to already successful exporters that are looking at new markets or expanding and things.
Which we do see that from companies that came in here 4 or 5 years ago.
Yes.
They're now exporting to various markets, and it's a main part of their business now.
Right. For our mentoring organizations, HPEC tends to be the mentor for more experienced companies because they have a lot of people that are already in sort of global markets or have done that kind of work before. The Patsy Mink Center is really working with sort of some of the newer companies. And SBDC, actually we have Lori Hiramatsu there. Wave your hand. That's one of our mentor partners. They're kind of doing kind of the companies in the middle. We actually kind of now have sort of an even range of the number of companies that each of those partner organizations is working with. So in other words, we do have a nice continuum of types of companies involved in HiSTEP. Okay, last thing, and I've got a website. If you just go to Invest.Hawaii.Gov, and it's exporting HiSTEP, it's all linked from, if you just go to Invest.Hawaii.Gov, there's links to HiSTEP. And I think the first step, particularly if you're attending this session, is to register with us so we know about you and we can give you a mentoring contact. And if you've already registered in previous years, we like to have people register each year because then it gives us an update. And then in our database, we sort of look at how you're progressing and sort of where you're at. I can take maybe 2 minutes of Q&A. Does anybody have any questions?
While you do that, I'll bring up the website just to show. Questions, please.
Yes. Yes,
Mike,
Randall.
you referenced about the natural product show that's taking place this year. What about a company, we're a biotech company, and we have a natural occurring marine compound? Does that preclude us because we're synthesized?
Well, the natural product show, you have to get approval. They're the ones, because they're the ones running the trade show, and that's why this has always been a little problematic. And also, it's just a really difficult show to get into because it was at the Anaheim Convention Center, and they just keep expanding out into hotels and stuff. But they're the ones that have to accept the application that you have a natural product. So I would suggest go to the natural product show, just Google that in Anaheim. It's in March, and look at kind of their requirements because you have to get sort of pre-approved from them before we could accept you in a Hawaii pavilion.
And the second question is, because what we do is we do health and medical educational presentations. How can we get onto the stage and the platform of presenting at these conferences?
Well, that's a good thing. I mean, that's like maybe a PR lecture, how if you sort of become an authority in a particular area that you're not just promoting your company, but you're kind of becoming like sort of an industry authority. I think you'd have to look at a trade show or a conference, and then usually they have a call for papers. For instance, for bio, the big life science trade show that we go into, they've already done a call for papers and things. And so there's usually an application process. You put in your abstract or proposal of what you want to present on, and then see if it's accepted.
Is that something that you guys will support us and finance us on?
Not because of this work. SBA has sort of their rules and stuff about what we can pay for and the types of companies. So it's not really exploratory. It isn't just like marketing or PR. If you're actually taking a trade show booth, they want sales really. So if things are related to sales, if you're using, for instance, individual assistance program, for instance, you don't actually even have to be going to a trade show, but we're sort of insisting that let's say you go to South Korea, that you have 6 meetings with potential buyers or distributors. And that's the kind of thing you'd put in your export development plan that we would sort of look at. Because this is kind of going back to those metrics, this all leads back to sales. And so if it's just sort of something that's marketing, we probably couldn't pay for that. Although one of the things you can use the individual assistance program for is localization. In other words, you have a website that's just in English and you're going into the Japanese market, you could use, I think, up to $2,000 or $3,000 to put that whole website in Japanese. Any other questions? Okay, I'm leaving my cards there. I have to leave a little bit early, but my cards are out there, and if anybody has any questions, just let me know or go to our website, and we all talk and things.
It's right here,
So,
exporting.
Yep.
That's it.
Yep, and it's just the Hawaii State Trade Expansion Program. And okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark.
Okay.
If you're not already registered, I highly recommend you get on that mailing list so you're aware of all of these types of programs that are going on. It's completely free of charge. Our next speaker this morning is Donovan Koki. He's Senior Vice President at the Bank of Hawaii, and we welcome him. This is the first time Donovan's spoken at one of our events, and we highly welcome you. Thank you for being here. I'd like to say thank you to Naomi Masuno, who has done this talk that Donovan's about to give for the past several years. She's now retiring. She was a longtime board member of the Hawaii Pacific Export Council. She's retiring from Bank of Hawaii. So we say thank you to Naomi, and we say welcome to Donovan. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have a relatively short period of time, so I'm going to go through a lot of information. This is going to be very high level for the most part. This is not one of those information sessions where I teach you how to do all this stuff. It's impossible to teach you finance in basically 30 minutes. So a couple of things that I wanted to first start out with is, and by the way, I really liked the talk the gentleman prior talked to me about, because most of you probably think bankers are only about numbers, numbers, and numbers, right? How many of you think that? Very good. All right, and you know, it may seem that way, but I will tell you, it's not only your numbers. We use numbers as, if you will, the quantitative aspect of being able for you to represent what you are going to do qualitatively. Okay? Quantitative, qualitative. So just kind of think about that. How do your numbers, or what is your activities that translates into the dollars and cents that you folks are all trying to make your mortgage payments and all that good stuff, and certainly probably last on your list is to pay back the bank, right? So first and foremost, what I would like to do is, so this is, if you will, much more about a general finance aspect, or a look at financing the export space. So just a little bit by my background, I have been with the bank for, I think nearly 18 years now. I was previously at another bank across the Pacific out in the West Coast. A very big bank. I was actually in or near the foreign trade zones that existed out there, out in Los Angeles area. I was actually out at the Long Beach regional commercial banking offices of one of the banks out there. So I do have a little bit of trade finance background. It's been a number of years, so you feel a little rusty at it. So can we move to the next slide? Sure. So first and foremost, remember I talked to you about the qualitative aspect. This is about your story, right? Some people call it a business plan and all that good stuff, right? I call it the story. The story is what I'd like to see translate into dollars and cents. So you need to be able to put together your story and reflect it that is consistent with the dollars and cents that you're presenting. You can give me a set of projections and all that good stuff. It's probably pie in the sky and all that good stuff. First thing I'm going to ask you, is this reasonable? Is this sustainable? How did you get your data? What is the background to support all of that? So keep that in mind. One of the things that I'm always mindful of is, how are you pricing your product, right? If I sold you a product for $1, but it cost you $2, are you going to ship the product? Probably not, right? In fact, what you're doing is basically it's more than free 99. So the first thing that you should take into consideration is what does it cost me to produce this good? And generally, when we think about cost, we always think about, oh, geez, if I buy this from the wholesaler, it's $1 for that widget. I can sell it for $1.05. Great, I make a 5% profit, right? But the question is that 5 cents enough? Certainly it covers that dollar, covers your direct cost of acquiring merchandise or what have you. But there's all these other stuff that goes along there, such as, so certainly the cost of the item, your direct cost, but there's all these other things called SG&A, or selling and general and administrative. You might even have some overhead that should be in part of your cost of goods sold. So some of the things that seem obvious are packaging, labels, paying for a marketing director or a marketing person or an agent, distributor, you may have to pay commissions, right? Commissions, your salespeople work for free? Man, they want to get paid for every unit that they're moving out there, so you have to incorporate that in your total charge, right? Translation, when I talk about translation, this is about, so if you're exporting to a company that don't speak English or ego, you're going to have to translate it into something that your target market can read and utilize, right? Ever see a set of instructions, you get it, you go, oh my gosh, where's the English? Ever do that? Try putting together a little box or one of those furniture items. It's all written in either Chinese or French or something like that. I can't. I'd have to look at pictures. So actually, pictures are kind of cool, ain't they? You don't have to read anything. You just look at the pictures. There are legal fees. There are bank fees. There's interest. There's shipping, delivery charges, insurance. So you think about insurance. There's shipping. You may need to get insurance to insure your product going over the water, right? What if that boat sinks along the way or disappears somewhere on the dock, right? There could be credit insurance. We'll talk a little bit, just briefly, on credit insurance and what that does for you. So you'll need to take into consideration all of those costs, right? There's other costs. What are we in right now? The big guy across the other side of the Pacific, we're in a trade war. So guess what? Tariffs, it's not so much about us paying the tariffs. We pay the tariffs here in the United States to receive those goods. But if there's tariffs on U.S. goods into some of the countries that you're having to put your product in there, that tariff is going to be paid by your buyer. So you have to include some of those costs. There might be regulatory costs. So you can think about all the other things that you have to consider while you're trying to determine the cost of your product. You need to have a reserve for currency fluctuation. Sometimes where your product is going, they're going to settle in something other than US. So does the US dollar stay constant in everybody else's country? Yes, no? No. So you've got currency risk that's also in there. And even though that you take a settlement in US, who's got currency risk? It's your seller, right? All of a sudden, my currency has moved up by 25%. Gosh, all of a sudden, my product is really expensive. Let's see. So, and like I had mentioned earlier, there are overhead charges. Do you work for free, by the way? Somebody nodded, yeah. Right? I don't like, I love products, but it always troubles me when certain items are priced without taking into consideration, one, compensation for myself, right? As well as a reasonable profit. And thirdly, I think that you should also be considering a premium for risk. Right? If it's totally riskless, no big deal. But if there is a risk premium, whereas you might get some shrink along the way, you've got some guys that's not going to pay you, you lose that inventory along the way, or that sale gets done, but there says, yes, I will pay you, right? Give me a hamburger today and I'll pay you next Tuesday, right? And next Tuesday rolls around, how about next Friday? And it goes on and on, right? Those are carrying costs. So you should be taking that into consideration, what I call a risk premium. Okay, next. So in the banking space, I'm actually focusing a little bit more on a number of items, but a lot more on the receiving, or if you will, on the selling end, if you're shipping products out to another country, right? So first and foremost, check to make sure that your bank can actually handle those types of transactions, or whether they're willing to take it on. Let's assume for a second that you're settling in currency other than US, and it's in a currency, an extremely soft currency, you might find banks that say, oh, geez, we can't settle in that, or take settlement in those areas. So always check with your bank. certainly in handling of payment. We'll look at payment methodologies as well, whether the banks will accept them. I had actually, as I was out in the Long Beach area when I was working for another bank, I had a customer that was actually shipping in product from the Middle East, basically chemical products and all that good stuff. And one of the things that used to drive me nuts is I used to get these things, what we call documentary collections, showing up on my desk. And I was a young banker at that particular time. And I asked my boss, I said, what the heck is a documentary collection? He goes, oh my gosh, you're getting another one of those. So these documentary collections, unlike letters of credit, we'll talk a little bit about the differences between the two, is these documentary collections is where a import, or if you will, an exporter is sending into my importer, and these goods are actually sitting on the dock, and they send all of these bills, if you will, and the customer expects a call from the bank and says, by the way, there's some DCs that are on the port. He'll go out there, look at it, and goes, I don't want it. And he won't settle up on it. So pretty risky in that particular space. And yet the bank has to help coordinate all of those. So at one point in time, I said, geez, I get $100 per DC. I said, with the risk that I'm undertaking on this, we can't do this anymore. And we had to exit out of that. So just some of the things, making sure you understand, you speak the lingo to the banker. And sometimes your bankers, depending on who the bankers are, may not really understand it. So it's very useful to make sure you have the right banker or that they have the right resources available to them. I got to tell you, banking is pretty complicated. There's so many different areas of specialty. One particular banker cannot house all of that information. I will admit I don't know everything. I know a lot, but I don't know everything. And there are some areas that I will rely heavily on specialists. So make sure when you talk to the banker, you have to explain to them, what are you doing? What do you want? What are some of the things that you need, and so forth? And we'll talk a little bit about some of those payment methods. So certainly you're going to look at what this cost is going to be, what is the process to be able to undertake this, what documents are necessary, right? Not only from documents that you need to bring into the banker or to the bank, but what kind of documents that you should be expecting to receive on the other end from your importer or who you're exporting to, right? What is the timing for both receiving or sending funds? Who is your contact person? Certainly bankers are one of your contact persons. Are there contact persons on the other side of the receiving ports? Right? It would really suck if you went, okay, so I'm shipping it to XYZ company. I have no idea who it is, but I got this order. What do you think the odds are you're going to get your money? Or even be able to track where that stuff is, right? Next slide. So these are some of the payment options that you'll see, and I've actually ranked this in lowest risk to the highest risk. So there's payment in advance, credit cards, wire transfers, LCs, or letters of credit, what we refer to letters of credit. I talked a little bit about documentary collections, open account, and consignment sales. So as you can see, this gets riskier and riskier and riskier and riskier. So the very first one, cash in advance. Man, this is the best that you can get, isn't it? They prepay you before you even ship your product. I love that stuff. You should love that stuff. Does that make you competitive? It may not, right? So understanding what your market is, what is the typical types of financing or trade financing arrangements that they're accustomed to. Certainly the bigger ones have much more expansive and more robust financing expectations on their end. The smaller ones, probably not. So how many of you have actually bought product from another country or imported product from another country? Small companies? What was that like? It's tough, isn't it? Right? Give me my money first, or give me something so I can guarantee you can guarantee that I'm going to get the payment and you're not going to squander this product. Okay? Guess what? The rules apply in the same way, in the other way. Okay? So smaller makes have more challenges, if you will, right? So now how do you get creative in that particular space? So certainly who are you targeting as your customers will help to determine the types of payment methodologies that you'll utilize. There are wire transfers, right? This is a little safer. But you also have to still ask your bank, can I accept wire transfers some certain country? So here's an interesting question. So let's say I'm shipping or selling product to Iran. Do you think the bank would accommodate a wire transfer from Iran? How about North Korea? How about what other countries? Rwanda. See where we're going with this? So you need to check with your bank even in terms of who your target locations are. Those countries might be on what we call OFACs, Office of, gosh, I can't remember. You remember, Lori?
It's Office of Financial Control, but I can't remember what the
Right.
A is.
So this is where all of the lists of all of these flag countries are, if you will. So there's OFAC issues, there's BSA, there's AML. So BSA, so guess what? The banks got, if you will, deputized by the federal government, frankly, right, to be the policeman. So there's all these lists. So you have to be sure that you can ship and sell into those particular countries. So here's another one. Let's say you're shipping, say, computer components to Iran. You think you can do that? What about Xboxes? Can you ship an Xbox to Iran? You might have some problems, right? Because they actually have components in those particular equipment or products that are banned by the United States government. So you can't ship that stuff. And you think about it because, gosh, we live in this very free country here, if you will. Xbox, I can go down the street and buy me one. What's the big deal of sending an Xbox or a PS4, what have you? It's a big deal. Okay? So be clear about, and these are some of the regulatory issues you got to deal with. All right, there's credit cards and PayPal. So I know some of these things here, when you're using a wire transfer, they say to perhaps utilize a specialized account or a certain account for those particular, helps with tracking, right? But you're also providing certain payment information, if you will, right? So you don't want those accounts to get penetrated by somebody else. So always be cognizant about, financial information to me is, if you will, golden. Just like your personal information, we freely give it with data, unfortunately, to make our lives more convenient, but understand that you are exposing yourself to more potential attacks. In fact, right now, you think today is a really good day, or this entire week has been a good day for the cyberspace? Who's out there right now? Every day is like this, by the way. But today, or this week, has been exceptionally tough, right? Who's out there? Guys out in the Middle East, man, they're looking for vengeance, right? And that's a cheap way to wage war. So there are also fees in wire transfers, intermediary bank fees. You get the point. It costs money, right? Credit cards and PayPal. Oh, and by the way, you also need to make sure is that your negotiating bank or the banks that are generating the wire transfers coming into the bank that you're doing business with to accept those payments, is whether or not that bank is an acceptable risk for those incoming wires, okay? Credit cards and PayPal, those are also alternatives. Issue is you gotta be wary of fraud, okay? Everybody heard the deep dark web? Guess what, man? There are tons of guys over there selling stolen information, and they're getting it on cents on the dollar. They might be selling a $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 limit for basically $1 or $2 because they know once that card gets penetrated and gets utilized, it's gone. Somebody will turn it off real quick. So they're going to take a real quick hit. Now, you as the, if you will, party that is taking on that credit card risk, do you think that the bank or the credit card companies are going to let you go scot-free if somebody else blows or turns out to be a fraud transaction? The answer is no. That's why you sign all those forms with a lot of these merchant providers. You have what we call chargeback risk. So those chargeback risks may not show up for 2, 3, 4 months. Anybody had, if you will, credit card fraud happen to you? You guys are actually pretty lucky. So I've had credit card fraud, small kind, right? It was called somebody took a swipe with a Walmart for, I think it was $25 or $50. And it wasn't even my card. They were charging it out in Florida. I hadn't been in Florida in months and months and months and months and months. In fact, it wasn't even in Florida. I was in Florida. The transaction happened somewhere in Wisconsin, which I never had been to at that time, even in the past. Okay? So that chargeback risk, guess who took the hit for that one? Was the one who had the credit, or at least the credit card in that the recipient's name or your name? No, guess what? You're going to call the bank and say, this is not mine. And guess what happens? That card goes back. They figure out that it is a fraud. It gets charged back to the merchant. Okay? So credit card payments, PayPal, all that stuff, debit card payments and the like, you still carry risk, particularly for bank fraud. Okay? The other thing are credit cards. As a merchant provider, you pay a ton of fees. Right? Depending on the size and volume, the less of your volume, the smaller ticket transactions that you have, the more you're going to pay in basically interchange fees. It's usually about 3 to 4% for generally the smaller merchants that you'll see. You'll see some of the bigger merchants have much greater discounts because it's all purely on volume. Next slide. So letters of credit. How many of you have heard of what a letter of credit is? All right, a few of you have. Okay. So letters of credit are issued by a bank. And one of the cool things about letters of credit is that that is an irrevocable promise to pay, and it's not the risk of the individual, your buyer's risk, it's the buyer's bank's risk. They're standing by that buyer and says, okay, here's the LC. If you meet all these particular conditions, I promise to pay your bank X number of dollars as stated on this letter of credit. All right? So in these, if you will, are 3 areas, and whenever you get a letter of credit, or they're issuing a letter of credit to support your goods, is going to be an applicant, or what we call the account party, which is the buyer, right? They're the ones that are taking on the liability. The beneficiary, what we use short shrift called bennies, would be the seller, that is you, and the issuing banks. Okay? And there's settlement banks, there's a whole bunch of information that goes on there altogether. Right? So, like I said, it substitutes the credit worthiness of your buyer with the buyer's bank. Right? If I were to buy a product from you, would you rather take my risk and say, well, you know, I'll buy 10,000 from you? So my promise to pay you versus my bank gives you a letter of credit for 10,000. Which one would you prefer? Which would you prefer? Me? I'm even here you can actually go find me, hunt me down, cut my legs off if I don't pay you. What would you take? I'd take the bank all day long, right? I don't have to go and cut my legs off. Right? The bank will settle up the score under that. Okay? So, in a lot of these LCs, particularly for smaller businesses or smaller entities, the letters of credits will be issued with some form of a collateral guarantee. So your seller or your buyer might have had to post cash in exchange for the bank to issue a letter of credit to you as the seller of the goods. Okay? Are there those that are naked on that collateral space? Yeah. Guess what? Those are for your bigger buyers. And certainly if you were issuing LCs and you had a balance sheet the size of God, I'm just kidding, but you had great credit, you had great sales, you're stable business, guess what? You might find banks that are willing to issue LCs without having you post cash for that collateral. or cash for that LC. Okay. So next one is documentary collections. We can kind of flip through this one. I talked a little bit about this. This one's a little riskier. It's basically a promissory note. And we have in the world what we call BAs. This is where banks actually actively trade in these bankers' acceptances. It's essentially taking discounted notes. These aren't, if you will, I'll be perfectly frank, documentary collections are not that common today because of the abundance of the types of other payment settlement options that are available. I haven't seen a DC or a traditional DC in a very long time. Right? So open account, love open accounts. Probably one of the riskiest or the highest risk in our framework. It is basically like what you would do says, you know what, I like you, I know your business, I know your mother, I know your father, I know even your firstborns. I've been doing business with you forever. I'll give you an open line of credit for $200,000. I'll sell you my goods, and you settle up with me in 30 days or what have you. So you have payment terms, 30, 60, 90. You can put discounts if you want them to collect faster and all that good stuff. This actually helps your seller, because he doesn't have to put up with all of the costs of financing or trade finance. You've taken that on. You have now become the lender. When you become the lender and you ask the bank to finance you, guess what? Your credit risk is starting to transfer to that bank, especially if you get into trouble because you can't collect on your receivables. So that's a very problematic. Guess what? Banks are very mindful and diligent in that particular space. Okay? We can go on. So Exim Bank, I had asked to talk a little bit about this. This is some of the ways to solve some of those risk issues, particularly on an open account basis where you want to stay competitive. The Exim Bank provides what we call export credit insurance. There are lots of rules and so forth, qualifications that you'll need to do. What it does, it helps to limit your risk. Right? You don't take on the political risk. You don't take on some of that credit risk that might be associated with these foreign buyers and the like. Right? Now, I don't think we have an Exim Bank here or an institution that actually does Exim Bank financing. All of that is, I think the closest one is in California.
Long Beach.
Long Beach. So these are things that you can consider. Again, this is about researching who you've got, what are your capabilities, and whether they can do it for you. So just a couple things. We can move to the next slide. So requirements for credit insurance. These are actually the requirements for credit insurance as it relates to the Exim Bank. Now, you might think that, geez, is that the only way I can get credit insurance? The answer is no. There are places that you can acquire credit insurance. They are private company. I think we used to refer to them as FCIAs. Right, foreign credit insurance agencies. Banks will accept those, and so that's the cool part. So if you are able to secure foreign credit insurance, your banks are willing to advance on those receivables because the FCIA or those insuring agencies are guaranteeing payment on those receivables in the event you go through a non-collection space. If they're not, most of your banks, if not all of your banks, will exclude any type of foreign receivables as a form of repayment on any of your working capital facilities and the like. Next slide. So a couple things about foreign exchange tips. I talked about that very briefly earlier on. Rates vary daily. They are set at the time of negotiation for the bank and the LCs and drafts. So interestingly enough, whenever you're taking in payment or making payment in another foreign currency, you have to have, if you will, your credit approvals all intact that has a reserve for the fluctuation, because you just issue an LC and you get paid the next day. No, it's like 30 days or something like that, or 60 days. Well, foreign currency can change dramatically or quite a bit during that period of time. So even if you're posting cash collateral or your seller is posting cash collateral, they're going to have to post based on the delta of that currency over periods of time. Okay? The longer the period of time, the bigger the delta, the bigger amount of cash they're going to have to post to cover reserve or foreign currency risk. So it gets a little bit more complicated. How much time do I have?
Just 2 minutes.
Okay. So just really quickly, always most of you are asking, so where's the money coming from? I want to do this export business. Right, certainly it's going to be out of your pocket, right? Your equity contribution. It'd be coming out, it could come out of the vendor's pocket. So if you're an exporter, you're the vendor. Or if you're shipping products and you're doing value add, guess what? Your vendor might be providing you ways to finance some of your product and take some of that risk off of your plate. I tell you, if you're not turning your inventory any faster than your vendors are collecting from you, you're carrying credit risk. Right? It's going to be cash out of your pocket. Okay? You can do it by consignment, bartering, customers prepaying, angel investors, grants, crowdfunding. Not enough time to talk about those items. Or you can borrow the money, right? You want to go to the bank. Certainly relatives, investors. I've seen companies companies in the startup mode, man, they were using their charge cards out of the blocks, okay? And the one that I did, she moved from $125,000 in her year one, financed everything through credit cards. In 2 years, she was at nearly $4 million in revenues, predominantly in that first 2 years financed by credit cards. I don't suggest it that way, but that was the way she did it and realized how expensive that was. Okay? So these are some of the sources that you can get this money at. Next one. So you guys get the rift. You've probably borrowed money. You got to get a loan application. You got to provide financial statements, tax returns, all this good stuff, and certainly a business plan, especially if you're going into a new space. Like I said earlier, tell your story. And not only in telling your story, does your story square with the numbers you're providing? So feasibility studies or some form of market research. Is there demand for that particular product? Are you priced appropriately? What are the competitors basically providing this from a cost perspective, if you will? So lots of homework got to go in there. You guys get the picture. The decision by the bank, that's me. We're going to ask you, how am I going to get paid back? That's the first thing I'm going to analyze. And what risks am I undertaking? The risks that you take, guess what happens? I got to take some of that risk. So the question is, can you mitigate some of that risk such that, so here's a cool part. If you were borrowed the money or money was put into your company and your company was wildly successful, and you ended up 50% in terms of a return on your investment, and the bank let you say $100,000, how much does the bank get out of that 50% return on investment? Do they get half of it? 3/4 of it? Nah, who gets all the upside? You do. What do the banks get? They got 2%, 3%, 4%. So risk return premium is the name of the game. So guess what? You know, if you think you can get free cash to get a 50% return and you have nothing at risk, that's a tough sell. Okay? So these are the things that we look for, right? Projections, realistic. Do you have the capability? You know, somebody talked to me about character. Character is about, yeah, I'm going to guarantee pay you back. Yeah, that's part of it. But when times are tough, what are you going to do? You're going to defend your home turf. You're going to defend your house. You're going to defend making sure your kids have food on the table. So guess what you're going to do? You're going to start moving or siphoning off that cash so you can continue to live. Right? So character is only good when the times are good. When times get bad, your character will get tested. I also take that into consideration, but more importantly, when I also think about character is what have you done in your past life? How well have you conducted your life? What is your experience? What is your education material? What kind of stuff have you done in the past that qualifies you to be a good manager or an entrepreneur? Right? So that's the whole character. I know it says credit score, but that's only just a small portion of that framework. It just tells me that when things are good, you're going to pay me back. But I'm much more interested about what you are capable of and what have you done in the past to show that your character levels are just beyond your credit score. Right? Capacity to repay, right? It's about cash flow, capital, how much money you got at risk, what kind of collateral do you have? More collateral, good collateral that can transfer easily into cash, the better, right? And certainly conditions. So this is when lenders, when things are really tough in the economy, do you think lenders are out there going, yeah, let's go lend more money? We'll just lend it to anybody. Probably not, right? This is when it gets a little tougher, right? They are going to selectively pull that out. So we also look at conditions that exist in the ground. How good are the conditions in that particular industry? Okay? Go on. So these are some of your resources, SBA, and like so I would like to talk more, but it's just not enough time to do so. Right? A lot of this stuff you can research online, right, through the SBA offices and the like. There are 7A programs, there are export programs, and the like. Use those resources. I keep on learning even just by, that's the beauty about Google, isn't it? You can find anything, anywhere, anytime, and on anyone. And so use those resources. This is a fabulous time to be in business because information is, they used to say information is power. It's just part of the equation. Execution is everything, right? Your ability and how to manage or use this information to make you a competitor or a better competitor, that's power, right? Thank you very much for your time. I wish I could spend more time with you, but good luck out there. I know you guys are a special breed. Entrepreneurs are near and dear to my heart. You guys are a special breed. That's why I'm a banker. I had to go get paid by somebody else. You guys are the ones who know how to take risks. Thanks, guys.
See if there's any questions.
By the way, anybody have any questions?
Any quick questions for Donovan? Thank you. This is a huge topic, and again, the point of today's seminar is just to give you a broad brush stroke of what's going on in these individual areas of exporting. So we'll have Donovan back for a few hours someday in the future and go through this in more detail. Any question? You have cards out for people?
I will.
Just leave them out front. Thank you so much, Donovan. Great. Our next speaker is Larry Foster. Larry is Professor Emeritus at the UH Law School, spent a lot of time in China, particularly many other countries, has a tremendous amount of experience in international law, and we're very grateful to have Larry here speaking. Let me get your presentation up, Larry.
I'm vertically challenged, so I need to hold the mic in my hand. Otherwise, I'm bending over the whole time. While he's bringing it up. Aloha, good morning.
Good morning.
Good to see you folks. There's some risks out there. I just learned of a new one. They're going to cut your legs off. It must be an LA thing. I don't know. But there are risks out there. But you folks are entrepreneurs, and you have a high tolerance for risk because you know that the rewards are out there. And the purpose of this particular program today is just give you an overall of some of the issues you need to address. One of the common themes that we're going to see is you got to find a good banker like Donovan. You got to find a good financial consultant, insurance agent, dare I say lawyer, to help you navigate through this. HiSTEP, all this material that's on the web that we have from, that's on DBED's web and HPEC's web, just a wealth of information that will really give you great assistance, free, going forward on what you're doing. So let's get into the slides. Time constraints as always, so I'll go through this quickly. So beginning with, are your business affairs in order? Donovan's talked about some of these already, but check out your social media profile if you're going to be going online and doing business. People are going to be checking you out. Do you have Yelp reviews, Better Business Bureau? I came across something recently called Reputation Defender. If you got a bad social media profile, reputationdefender.com will clean up your online reputation. Don't ask me how they do it, but they do it. But you're going to have to make sure your social media profile is good. Intellectual property issues. Do you have the intellectual property for the products that you're going to be selling? Or do you have licenses to do it? Is your intellectual property protected? Do you have the copyrights and trademarks and all these kinds of things? For your employees, do you have contracts with them? Non-competition, confidentiality clauses. A couple of years ago, there was a rash of Japanese copycats. The Japanese love Hawaii. They come here, they go to a restaurant and say, wow, this is a really cool restaurant. I'm going to go back to Osaka and open this restaurant in Osaka. So they just steal your name and open the restaurant. And people in Japan say, oh yeah, I ate there in Honolulu. I'm going to go to that restaurant in Osaka. Well, they stole your intellectual property. So some Hawaii lawyers have been working on those issues. An interesting case recently, there was a hula halau here, a very famous hula halau, and they discovered that somebody in Japan, they had never registered the name of their hula halau. Maybe it's a Hawaiian culture thing, I'm not sure. But somebody in Japan just opened up a halau under that name, trademarked it in Japan, and that halau is only the Japanese halau has the rights to that name, no longer the Hawaii halau. So protect your intellectual property. Okay. So other kinds of things, and this was covered a little bit by Donovan also, but compliance, are you in good standing with DCCA? All your taxes, good corporate records, all these kinds of things. Make sure that your sort of internal house is in order. Okay, next slide. Some export terms. So there's a lot of jargon in this sort of exporting context. So this is sort of a text thing on two of the most common things. Could you go to the next slide?
I would just add, right here, these are called Incoterms, and we'll talk about those later in the day, but these are very important if you're just getting into exporting.
So I'm a visual guy. Text, I look at it and say, what does that mean? Well, this sort of explains it. Who bears the risk? So when you put something on a ship to ship it off, or on an airplane, or through the mail, who bears the risk of loss? So you got to pay attention to this kind of thing, this either CIF or free on board. All the stuff's available on Google. You don't have to stress out too much about it. And again, I'm a visual guy, and this sort of explained a lot of it to me, who bears the risk. But just things you have to watch out for as you're shipping things overseas. Okay, next one. Use a written contract. I can't overemphasize the importance of using a written contract as you're, and this is maybe more in the, if you're just doing one-off sales, that's not important. But if you have like a distributor that you're getting in, working with in X country, use a written contract. You get a lot of excuses. We're friends, don't you trust me? Well, of course I trust you, but my lawyer, my wife, blame somebody else. My wife, my spouse, whatever, tells me I gotta have a contract, so let's do a contract. Why spend so much money for a lawyer? There's an old term from, I guess, back in World War II days, ounce of protection is worth a pound of cure. You got to spend some money up front to do this. Donovan talked about this as sort of the cost of getting export business off the ground. You got to have some good legal advice. Another excuse you hear is, well, contracts can't be enforced in X jurisdiction, so why should I have a contract? So if you can go to the next slide. So that's often true, or sometimes true, but the contract provides clarity on the deal. This is what we agreed to. So it's important to have a contract that everybody's on the same page. Maybe it might prevent a potential breach. Lawyers love Latin, in terrorem effect. You terrorize them, you scare them. I'm going to sue you if you don't, perform on this contract. Whether or not it actually has that much effect, but it's still very helpful to have a contract underlying your transaction. The great majority of contracts, 98% of contracts are performed without any problem. It's that one time that can just be very complicated. So you really want to have that contract there. Donovan was talking earlier about not all bankers know everything about banking. Same thing with lawyers. You want to find a lawyer who has some understanding of the export business, and if you're going to be shipping large quantities to someplace else in the world, you want to have a lawyer who sort of understands the law of those jurisdictions, ideally also understands the language of that jurisdiction, particularly if you have dual language contracts. I think in June sometime we're going to spend 3 or 4 hours just talking about distribution agreements, long, boring session, so bring your pillows for that. But these contracts are incredibly important to have. Next one, please. Export controls. Donovan touched upon this a little bit. Sometimes you need a federal export license. Don't ask me what that means, but go to this website. Very clearly laid out in that website what kind of things that you have to worry about for your export controls. Raw honey. I was thinking to myself, what kind of things are we exporting out of Hawaii? Well, honey is a food product. Raw honey is being exported out of Hawaii. Well, it turns out there are some issues with that. And if you go to this U.S. Department of Agriculture website, they'll give you all the information you need to know about whether or not this export is going to require a federal export license. Anti-boycott regulations, we've seen those already. Donovan talked about that. Trafficking in endangered species. And this isn't just selling a nene goose or something like that, but the parts of these species. So ivory, whalebone, these kinds of things. Someone recently in the neighbor islands was arrested by the, I think, charged and convicted for selling whalebone at a farmer's market or something like that. National security issues, dual-use technology. Donovan touched upon this as well. If you're just selling clothing, that's not going to be an issue, but you start getting into more complex things. And I didn't realize Xbox might be on that list, but perhaps it is. Okay, next slide. Foreign import controls. So we have export controls. You can't just send anything willy-nilly out of the United States. When it comes into the other country, and Donovan touched on this a little bit, there's import controls as well. A number of countries will not allow pornographic materials. What is pornography? The U.S. Supreme Court says, well, we know it when we see it. But if it's anything that looks borderline pornographic stuff, be very careful about shipping it. Check out the product labeling requirements in the country to which you're sending your material, particularly if it's foodstuffs. If you're shipping clothing, a lot of shippers, when they ship clothing, they put like formaldehyde on it. That sounds terrible, but they put things, sort of drying agents to make sure it doesn't mildew. So when it arrives in the other country, then it'll arrive without mildew and these kinds of things. I remember in China, the Chinese customs intercepted a number of shipments coming in from Europe, high-end luxury goods. They exceeded the limit of formaldehyde and other chemicals that they had on it, and they destroyed the shipments. So you need to be careful on that on large scale shipping. Certain rare woods. There is I will not name it, but an institution here in Hawaii that had a lot of good connections in Japan, and they were going to Japan to give certificates to people in Japan for helping this organization in Hawaii. And they wanted to be sort of special, so they put it in nice, I think it was rosewood, nice rosewood frames. And they came into Japan and they had it in a big cardboard box off the airplane. If you're going to sneak something into the country, don't put it in a cardboard box. But anyway, so they had it in a cardboard box and they declared it as rosewood frames. And the customs guy in Japan said, "Oh, well, we don't allow rosewood to be shipped into Japan. So be careful." And there's some information about this that you can jump to. Next slide. Food products. GMOs. Some countries are more concerned about GMO products than the United States are. Banned additives. Ice cream. Donovan was talking earlier about tariffs and stuff like that. Canada protects its milk industry. And there's a company here in Hawaii called Bubby's, the mochi, right? Well, Bubby's wanted to ship mochi to Canada because they saw there was a great, huge market there. Well, guess what? Mochi ice cream is an ice cream product. It's a milk product. So there was going to be a huge tariff on the mochi ice cream. So what did Bubby's do? They reformulated their mochi ice cream products going to Japan so that the percentage of milk was enough to make it a rice product rather than a milk product. So you can get around these things sometimes going there. Beef jerky, it's a little unclear to me what the status of this is, but this is a website that talks about beef jerky taking into Japan. A few years back in the United States, we had a mad cow disease outbreak, if you will, and that scared a lot of countries, and particularly in Asia. So for the longest time, you couldn't bring U.S. beef products or things like beef jerky into Japan or China. That's shifting a little bit now. But you got to be careful and sort of make sure that the product you're shipping is not going to be banned at the other end. Next slide, please. So Hawaiian Health. I sincerely doubt this is a Hawaii product, but the Hawaii brand is so strong that everybody likes to put it on that. So our brands are being taken over by a lot of people. But these are hemp gummy bears. The problem with hemp is that, you can derive a chemical from that CBD and CBD oil. So these are gummy bears infused with CBD oil, all right? So if you want to ship something like this into Japan, for example, or Canada, let's take Canada. Cannabis is legal in a lot of parts in Canada, but the problem is if you have any THC in it, and hemp sometimes has elements of THC in it, then it has to be handled in a special way and only sold through special stores in Canada. Same thing in Japan. But this is, I love the marketing on this. A label, this is genuine quality. This is not fake quality. This is genuine. This is some great marketing on this thing here. Nothing about what the THC content is. So it would not probably be able, you'd have complications sending it into Canada or Tokyo. Next one, please. So health products, CBD, here's the website for Japan, website for Canada. My reading of those two websites say it's basically the same problem that we have in the US. Nobody's sure what you can do. You can certainly go to many, many places, Alamana Center, whatever, and buy CBD oil. But if you take it on an airplane and the guy at TSA says, "What's that bottle in there?" And you say, "Oh, it's my CBD oil." And depending on the time of the day and the agent, it's going to be confiscated or not confiscated. And apparently the same thing is sort of true in Canada and Japan. A little unclear as to whether or not you can do it. Okay, next slide, please. Corruption. So pretty much every country nowadays has an anti-corruption law. And your distributor will say, oh, just slip the customs guy $100 and your goods will clear customs quicker. Well, there's all these laws out there now, and so for example, for the U.S., it's the U.S. Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, and what happens overseas does not stay overseas. It'll come back to haunt you, and your company will be investigated, fined, whatever, for your practices in a foreign country. Next slide. Wrap up. So the Hawaii brand, as I said before, is very strong all around the world. Everybody loves Hawaii products, so much so that everybody just sort of steals our brand and brands their products as Hawaiian products. But do your research, and as Donovan said, Google is a great resource. Do all your research before you get too far down the line, before you've invested too much money on preparing your product. So I'm going to stop there and urge you to come back in June and
It's June 25th.
June 25th, distribution contracts. The one I use is an international contract. It's only 45 pages long, and only 80% of it is legal jargon, so it's pretty easy to navigate. But I mean, let me stop there, and any questions? Yeah.
Thanks for your presentation. On your first slide, you talked about intellectual property.
Yes.
And as you're quite aware, a lot of companies choose, for example, incorporation in Delaware, for instance,
Mhm.
due to the Chancery Court and the precedents of law.
Mhm.
I've just moved here to the island and looking to launch my next tech company. And
Cool.
so I had a question for you, which is, how strong do you find the IP protections are handled in the state courts here in Hawaii?
Well, it's a federal law issue, so the federal courts would handle it. We have our federal court judges are very competent, very good, but they're generalists. I used to teach securities regulation, and it's an incredibly complex area of law. And unless you're in New York City with the judges there, the federal judges, anywhere else in the country, Hawaii judges handle federal securities cases once every 5 years, so their expertise is not that big. But intellectual property, we have a good intellectual property bar here, and so I would not see that as an issue. Yeah. And we're going to have a program coming up on intellectual property. Well, we did last year, right?
I was just going to bring that up. IP, intellectual property, even for a very tiny company, one-person company, is extremely important to get your hands around that. You don't think as a tiny little company here in the middle of the Pacific Ocean that you have intellectual property, but you do. Your logo is intellectual property. The tagline that you associate with your company is intellectual property. All of that is very important to get that under control before you start exporting, because as Larry mentioned, there have been a lot of cases in Hawaii where very well-intentioned, newer business people here had their logos or corporate names or taglines taken and used by Japanese companies and Korean companies, and the local company lost that. Right? We saw last year there was a big case on the mainland with some poke, right? Yeah. That gets publicized, but a lot of these things in foreign countries don't really get publicized very well. And lots of very good companies here lose their trademarks because they just don't simply register it first, and another foreign entity will register it, and then they have legal access to it, right? So we need to get that under control. I'm sort of evangelizing on this topic the past couple of years because we've really seen some very good companies here get burned in that area. Roughly, trademarking, what does that cost somebody, roughly?
Pennies, just pennies. It's very, very inexpensive to do, and worth it. If you go to Hawaii trade shows, we just had one recently at Blaisdell. There's a lot of folks walking through taking pictures of all the products there, and guess what they're doing? They're taking your intellectual property, and copying it and selling it. I was looking at some. I went online to do some research, just Hawaiian jewelry stuff, and I saw a lot of Hawaiian jewelry stuff offered by a variety of sellers online, and they certainly looked all almost identical from a variety of sellers, and that told me that somebody's intellectual property is getting ripped off. Yeah.
What I'd like to add to what both you and Rob said, getting your intellectual property and trademarks registered in the U.S. is extremely important before you even begin to export. But you've got to look at the country that you're exporting to, because you need to register that IPR and trademark in that country to also protect it. China, for example, can take it automatically from you. And in China, if you go in, for example, if whoever registers that IPR first, say the trademark or the name or any of that, they own it. So if somebody, you're displaying things here, like Larry said, at a trade show or something like that, somebody, and I'll just use an example, somebody from China, Japan, Korea, wherever, takes that, they go back home, they register that name and that trademark, they own it, regardless of whether you're gonna export it or not. So they own that. So you have to do your, absolutely, I'm with Rob, on really being an evangelist on registering trademarks and IPR. But you also have to do that research on the country you want to export to. And before you get too far out the door or start sharing too much, you have to register in that country. And it doesn't take much to just register in any of those countries. But you have to do it. Otherwise, you'll still lose it. It doesn't matter that you're registered here, in spite of, the world IPR and trademark regulations and laws that, for the major world conventions on it. It's going to be individual.
I realize when we bring up these topics that if you're new to exporting, this sounds very complicated and expensive, and it really isn't. And I would point you to our archive of events that we've done here. We've done particularly interesting seminars just on intellectual property for the small exporter. And if you look through our archive of videos, you can find that, where there are very experienced IP attorneys here in Honolulu that you can work with at a reasonable rate, and you talk to them about where you're thinking about exporting, and they'll help you develop a plan of where you need to start trademarking your products.
And we're talking hundreds of dollars, not thousands of dollars, to protect your intellectual property.
But it's extremely important. Randy?
Yeah, is there a website that we can go to see if our brand has already been taken in, say, China, trademarked already in China? See if someone already claimed it. If we did not do it at this point in time with Japan or Korea.
Yeah. So that's not my particular area, but I would think that information would be available. But again, I've not looked myself before.
It's available if you are good at reading Chinese or you're good at reading Japanese. If you just go to the main U.S. website is USPTO.gov, U.S. Patent and Trade Office.gov, G-O-V. But if you are going to the Japanese version of that, it's not going to be highly searchable in English, or certainly the China version isn't going to be. So that's where it helps to have a patent attorney that has reciprocal relationships with attorneys in those countries too. And they can find out for you very, very quickly. I've worked with them many times. They find out within a matter of hours, oh, hey, this thing that you're trying to register, it really matches this name in Japanese, and I don't think it's going to work out for you there, but how about you try this name or you try that? And you figure it out together. We're getting very far afield, but there's a Madrid protocol that was set up several years ago that allows for organizations like you to register in multiple countries at one time. And the IP attorney can help you sort that out very, very quickly for a rather reasonable fee. I had one quick question. A lot of companies, small companies, will have had experience with an attorney. Hopefully it was a positive experience, to set up the corporation or just get some advice on things. Is it your experience that the general attorney that helps set up the company, is that the same attorney that would help with foreign contracts, or do they need a different attorney?
Not necessarily. I kind of touched on this earlier on Donovan talking about bankers. Not every banker knows everything. Same thing with lawyers. So your general corporate lawyer may not have a clue about some of these export issues. So talk with them about who they might recommend to go to.
So your particular
You need a specialist.
your specialty is China, right, or roughly?
I've been to China, yeah.
Okay. So,
I love Chinese food.
but if somebody came to you and said, Larry, I'd like to do something in Brazil, would you take that on, or would you point that to
I would point very quickly to try to find someone who understands Brazil. There's a trade association in South America, Mercosur, I think, something like that. So there's a lot of things out there. But when you look at markets out of Hawaii, anyway, narrow it to that. Canada is huge. U.S. mainland, Japan, growing with China. The China tourism is down substantially right now to the United States for some trade war issues and other political issues. But the IP lawyers in Hawaii have contacts all around the world, and they work with them on a not daily basis, but on a regular basis. So don't go to your corporate lawyer, go to a specialist.
Most of the companies here that are thinking about exporting, they would have to have an agent or a distributor in Japan or Germany or wherever they're working. How complicated does an agreement, a contract between the Hawaii exporter and a Japanese agent, how detailed does that need to be in order to just function on a daily basis?
Yeah, 40 to 50 pages of very complex language is all it takes. It's complicated. Donovan kept on using the word risk. Yeah, and I opened up with that. There is risk out there, but you minimize that risk by doing your homework, getting good advisors on the banking side, on the legal side, the resources that are available through HiSTEP and DBED and HPEC to help you identify the risk and then resolve as best as you can, resolve the risk. If everything was risk-free, then none of us would be sitting in this room. We'd be, on yachts in wherever people with a lot of money go. So there's risk out there, and you have to watch out for that.
Okay, great. Any further questions for Larry?
What's your cost to draw up a contract? The minimum cost?
Google, and type in the word contract, and you'll wind up with, I don't know. The really good news is that Hawaii, I don't practice anymore. I'm a recovering lawyer. I try not to practice. But most lawyers in Hawaii charge, I don't know, I think the going rate these days for most are around $400 an hour, which is a bargain, because their colleagues on the West Coast are charging double, triple that. So your legal costs coming out of Hawaii are substantially less. It really depends on the nature of the contract. If you have a 50-page distribution agreement with a distributor in China, you need a lawyer who knows Chinese law and knows the Chinese language, because it's going to be a dual language contract. And as those layers of expertise creep up, so does the cost of the services. But I would encourage you to work with a lawyer. A friend and I teach a course at UH Law School on small business contract drafting. And we open up with a contract that one of his clients brought into him one day. He had a favorite restaurant he goes to in Honolulu, and got to know the owner really well. One day the owner said, "Yeah, I want to sell my business." And the guy says, "Hey, I want to buy your business." So they took out a napkin, literally a napkin from the restaurant, paper napkin, and wrote out the contract. It pretty much left out everything that's supposed to be in a contract. And guess what? The deal went south. and they got this little piece of paper that they're litigating at a cost significantly higher than it would have been to have had a lawyer draw up a contract.
On contract, when I was working in Shanghai, I had somebody in Hawaii draw up a contract for me with a major corporation that we were going to be doing a lot of things with. Of course, initially the contract was all in English, and it's like Larry just said, it depends on how detailed it needs to be and the expertise of the attorney who's doing it. In my case, that one only cost maybe, I think it was a couple $1,000, because a lot of the contracts, depending, there's a template for a lot of the contracts, then it goes into the fine detail, what needs to be in it, and then the additional one is translating that contract into a foreign language. And that's, I think, more where the cost is, from my experience, than the general contractor. So I get the contract the way I understand it, but being able to get somebody in another country whose language, her native language isn't English, and getting it into their language, if they have the vocabulary for some of the words, we're using in our contracts, which may or may not be the case. But it wasn't a prohibitive cost for getting that contract straight based on the revenues that were being expected out of that deal. So I think it was all on healthcare and the healthcare industry and the type of services that were going to be provided, to a different market group, in this case in Shanghai. But it was well worth the cost to be able to do it. You'll find that until you start talking to a few lawyers, it depends how their rates vary. Larry talked about per hour. I would go in and talk to lawyers and say, I understand your per hour rates, I don't want your per hour rates. This is what I need, this is what I need done, and what would the total cost of that package be? Because you know how long it's gonna take you to draw that up. So I'm not gonna negotiate with you your hourly rate, I'm gonna negotiate with you what is the cost, total cost, to do this contract, bearing any unforeseen, issue that may come up in dealing with the foreign country. So I would approach working with an attorney not on an hourly cost. And you'll find in asking a few people, even the mentors at HiSTEP or wherever, or even some other people who may know the legal community here, who they know in that country, how much they would charge, or what their relationship is. There's various organizations, meetings we've attended. One is the Inter-Pacific Bar Association that represents all the lawyers across the Asia-Pacific region. There's a lot, and another one is multi-law. All these law firms that do this globally and internationally in various aspects of industry, can work with you, and you can have somebody introduce yourself to them. But again, I always shy away from that. You'll find almost every lawyer will shy, or people, when you ask them how much does it cost, they're not going to tell you because they don't know what it is. But you know what you want, and you know what you want to get covered, and they have the templates, but they also then will tailor them. And I had to go back and back and back on the contract I wanted, but I wanted that cost up front. And it saved thousands of dollars in the end for the organization with which I was working and negotiating that with. We had some tough negotiations with the other party, but we got what we wanted. So I would approach it maybe slightly different than if you go talk to a lawyer. But that is my experience in working with that in Asia. Now, it just depends. And we have a lot of excellent lawyers here in Hawaii who have those connections in Asia and who can work with you on what you want, corporate lawyers, I believe. And they also know their colleagues around the region because they meet all the time. And again, it just depends. We're talking, and we're SMEs, and most of the businesses are SMEs, not talking about major corporate law in most cases. So that would be just, some experience.
Go back and look at our YouTube archive too, because Larry did a very good presentation a year or so ago on just key verbiage that should be in some simple contracts, and I think that it's really great program. So
I think we also gave out a copy of the distribution contract.
yeah.
And then you went through the verbiage and what's in it. So the advantage to coming to these free programs is you will have, if you come to that program, you will have a distribution contract, and you'll have one in your hand that you can explain to, and you can also take that to whatever attorney you may want to meet with or whatever. But it will give you a basic understanding and some basic database information that you may need.
And you were saying multi-law, are they based here in Honolulu?
No, they're an international organization, but we do have law firms here in Hawaii that are members of multi-law. And I don't know if all of them is. I certainly know one. I suppose I'm not supposed to start naming law firms. But we can certainly talk to you afterwards. I don't know, Ray, you know if more than the one belongs to multi-law?
Well, there's several organizations. They're just sort of corresponding networks, if you will. So there's several Hawaii law firms have various memberships in these different kinds of organizations.
Okay. Thank you very much, Larry. Wonderful. Oops. Next up, our next speaker is Kanzo Nara. Nara-san is an IT expert, but also just on website building, multilingual websites, social media, and multilingual. So I've asked him to come and talk about what are some of the IT requirements for a modern company trying to export.
Thank you, Rob-san. As mentioned, my name is Kanzo Nara. I am the president of QP Web Design here in Hawaii. I specialize in multilingual website development and marketing. And also, we teach how to make websites too, which is I Do Web School.
Oops, sorry. Just bear with me while my computer catches up.
Okay. While we're waiting, quick question. How many people have websites for their company? Okay, how many people have an e-commerce component to their website? Good, good, good. Okay, so as you're probably aware, everybody has a website now. Just some statistics out there. There's over 6 billion domains right now. So that's basically everybody has one website in the world. So it's a very important element of your business now. Are we rolling?
Yep.
Okay, so you can go to the next one. Quick background about me is I was born and raised in Japan, so I'm fluent in English and Japanese. I've also lived in Taiwan, the Soviet Union, and speak some of the languages, but not fluently. I've immigrated to Hawaii in 2000. I've been doing web and IT marketing for almost 20 years now. We can go to the next one. Some of our company customers are Hyatt, Sheraton, Straub Medical Clinic, JTB, Tokai University, and so on. Okay, next slide, please. You can skip this one. Okay, so getting started for e-commerce, there's very many approaches. I'm gonna boil it down to 3 ways to get started. Okay, the 3 messages. One is having your own website. Second one is using a third-party system. Third one is using an online market. Okay, and I'll go into more detail for each one. First one is owning your own website. This one's the most traditional method, but it has a lot of components to it, like getting your own domain, getting your own hosting, security, SSL, selecting a credit card merchant. There's a lot of things that goes into it, and it can be quite pricey. Okay, next slide, please.
Plus it requires you to know how to do it.
Yes, yes, yes. So, I mean, even if you're not a tech-savvy person, there's a lot of things you need to get for this, like tax-wise, hosting. Has anybody ever heard of a SSL? Okay, yeah, this is a big thing that changed in Google last year, actually no, 2018, so over a year ago now, is all sites are kind of strongly recommended to have a SSL on their website, even if you're not selling anything. Before, it was when you were selling something to make sure your information was secure. Now Google is saying your website has to all be an SSL. So it's very important if you haven't had an SSL upgrade to your website to have an SSL now. Okay, the second one is probably the easiest place to start if you're going to do e-commerce, is instead of building your own website, you use a third party like Shopify or Wix. There's a whole bunch out there. Some are more heavily focused on domestic online shops. Some have international components into them, so you want to look at them. I would recommend Shopify for international ones. The good part about this is they kind of take care of the SSL, the shipping, and the credit card processing, so it's an easy place to get started. And a lot of them give you the option of registering your own domain with them. Okay. This one is a lot more popular now, even for individuals, not so much businesses, but you can start selling your products on these platforms like Amazon. The downside about using these large platforms is they're very strict. So your packaging has to be a certain way. You can't use that styrofoam fluffy stuff you put in to ship it out. They won't allow it because a lot of the robots can't handle the styrofoam. You can't have special deals that you want to do for, let's say, like Mother's Day and things like that. So you're very confined into their parameters. But you know, they're really big. Amazon's the biggest shopping cart in the world right now. And for Japan right now, I think they're number 3. So they're still pretty big in Japan. Japan number 1 is Rakuten. They're the largest shopping platform in Japan right now. Okay, so we've kind of gone over the basics of number 1, 2, and 3 of how to get the website up. Now is the design component. So the actual people that come visiting your site in Japan are very different than the users here in the US. I'd like to show a few examples. First example is, before the example. So Japanese sites, number 1 thing you're gonna notice is very heavy in content. The reason for this is a lot of the products in Japan, people don't search for products. They like to be told what's popular. So instead of searching for specific things that the users might want, the seller has to give the buyers, you know, this is what's popular, you should buy this. And a lot of times they like to have package deals. So you need to come up with good package deals to sell things. So instead of, you know, for like Mother's Day, if you want to sell some flowers, you can't just have a whole bunch of flowers on your website. You need to come up with 3 roses and this. I haven't sent flowers to my mom in a while, so I'm not sure what the popular flowers are, but you need to have a good package deal. And best case, even you want to go to have tax included, shipping included, everything all together, click here type of thing. Okay, next one. Okay, so a few web design examples. This one is Pizza Hut here in the US. This is getting a little bit old. Most people use the mobile version, but this is the desktop version. So you have a big picture of a pizza in the middle, then you have the navigations on top, and at the right-hand corner it says start order. Pretty straightforward, right? And they only have one special here. One large, one topping, $12. This is the US. Let's go to the next slide, please.
I want to point out one thing. Our eyes, because we're used to looking at that, we see contact us is off to the right. Things have sort of settled down on websites. So almost every design is roughly the same when you're looking at a US website. But I think where he's going is that if you're trying to target foreign markets, it's probably different.
Okay, so just to show one more example, this is Pizza Hut in Saudi Arabia. Then again, you know, pretty similar to the US one. You have one main picture, you have your navigation at the top, and you have start your order in the middle. Okay, the third one is gonna throw you off. This is Japan's Pizza Hut. They got so many pictures. You have a left navigation, header navigation. They have a secondary header navigation. They have a members registration page. They have what's popular, what's in season, try something new, what rankings. It just drives you nuts. There's too much happening here. But this is what the Japanese market likes. They don't want to search for the pizza. And a lot of times, in Japan, you can't build your own pizza. Did you know that? You can't say, I want just cheese and pepperoni. You can only buy these packaged pre-made pizzas. There is no customized pizza section on here. So that's how package-oriented the Japanese market is. They don't like to come up with their own product or have customized things. They even have a hard time when they go to Starbucks here when, you know, people ask them, you want 2 shots or 3 shots? They're like, it's not on the menu? You know, so if it's not on here, they're not gonna even bother to look for it. So it's hard to try to sell things in Japan. Not in a sense that you need to remarket it. You just have to come up with selling the same products in many different ways, which is the best way to summarize it. So just one product is not one product. You want to have that be available in different methods, different packages. Okay, so we got your website, we got your design up, now we want to start selling and shipping your product. This is the part where we talk about shipping and taxes when it comes to international sales. The good news about online shoppers is it's continuing to increase. In 2017, 70%, we saw a 70% increase in online shoppers. In 2019, it's up to 93% now. Average spending went from $112 in 2017 up to $147. So people are buying more online and spending more online. So this is definitely someplace you want to focus a lot of your resources to sell international markets is online. Okay, be transparent about fees. We've gone into a lot of details about financing and legal aspects. This kind of touches into the actual front end portion of it. So when you're selling online, I want to show abandonment reasons for when you're checking out. So people actually like your product, they add it to the cart, and then when they go to checkout, each platform is going to handle different. Some already have the tax included, some adds the shipping, so on. If you buy 5 products, you get free shipping. A lot of times you can't do this with international shipping. And the top reason for people abandoning your shopping cart, 60%, is when they go to the checkout, the extra costs are too high. So if you buy a $10 product and you go to checkout and it turns out to be $25, they're not going to buy it anymore. So you want to be straightforward with your costs. This is another important part when it comes to customs, is just because you're doing it online and you're selling it in a small package to consumers individually, doesn't mean you don't have to worry too much about customs because it's not a bulk order of 1,000 or 10,000. And we've been talking a lot about Google as a good resource. Guess what? The customs guys knows how to use Google too. This has happened to my customer too. They were selling like a $500 Hawaiian jewelry and they priced it as $50 on their package. When it got to Japan, the tax amount for customs got passed on to the user, who complained a lot, and this happened to a lot of the users since people stopped buying on their website. So you don't want to try to be tricky on this part. You want to use what's called a harmonized system, which is a code offered by the customs. It's an international code for products. You want to label them correctly so customs know what the product's coming in. And I'm not going to lie to you, these codes are crazy. They'll drive you nuts. There's, I don't know how many there are, but you think shampoo is shampoo, right? No. You go to hair products, you're going to find like 187 different types of hair products. And you have to find the specific HS code that meets your product the best. But don't go crazy over it. Just find something that's the most closest to what your product is and put that on there. The customs people just want to know what the product is coming through, and you've actually put the effort into using this HS code.
When you hear about tariff wars or trade wars, this is what it's about, that the government of some country has looked at the harmonized code system and they say, we're putting a tariff of 25% on this section of the HS code. So everybody understands what those products are in that list.
Yeah, chances are you're not going to find the exact code for what your product. Just try to come close within the ballpark. Okay, so this is a cost analysis sheet of selling your product, the example. So your product's $12. You have packaging, shipping, handling charges, taxes, credit card fee, profit margin. So a $12 product comes up to be $56. Yeah, so that's quite a bit, So when you're selling online, you want to make sure how much you're paying your merchant, how much is your shipping, how much you're going to use for your box, if you're going to use that fluffy styrofoam stuff you put in boxes or whatnot. Otherwise we go back to that, the financing issue. If you buy a product for $1, you're selling it for $1.05, you're not going to be making a profit. Okay, next slide, please. So 83% of users are on your smartphones now. And this This actually isn't, 83% all the time. This is your first search. So when people do a first search, 83% of the time they're gonna find you on your phone. The second time goes down to 50%, and after that, people spend more time on a desktop. So the key element is you want to have a good website on your smartphone that's responsive and catch your user right away. Okay, so web users in Japan, where are they and when are they looking for it? Unlike here in the US, a lot of Japanese companies are very strict on what pages you can and cannot use during business hours. So you're not going to find, somebody on their break time in a Japanese company looking for your Mother's Day flowers. They're not allowed to. A lot of companies even track your computer during work time to make sure you're working and not, searching on Google. And sometimes they have specified search engines you can use, and you can't use Google and so on. So when people are going to be shopping, they're going to be looking for stuff in transit. And what this means, a lot of metropolitan areas in Japan, people use public transportation. So they're on bus, subways, trains. Japanese even carry 2 extra batteries with them because they spend so much time in transit. So they use their smartphone with the extra battery while searching for stuff. The second one is lunchtime and after they finish work and when they go home. This is when a desktop comes in handy. So the first 2 times they're in transit using their smartphone. The third time they might actually buy when they get home at evening time.
So just to reiterate, these two, a customer would be looking at the mobile phone
Yes,
while they're on the
exactly.
train or
Yes.
something like that.
Yeah.
And then they might put it in their cart, but then finish when they get home.
Exactly, yeah.
Interesting.
Okay, so the landing page. Anybody hear of LPO? I know everybody heard of SEO, right? LPO is kind of a condensed version for a specific page. So you want to have a landing page optimization, which means instead of doing SEO for your entire site, you want to have a specific page for a specific product. So we're going back to that Mother's Day flower bouquet arrangement. We want to have one single page for just that package. Back in the day when we were just looking at websites on our desktop, we go to our website, we click on this link, we go to this page, we go to that page. It doesn't work that way anymore. You search for something on Google, it comes up. If it's not there, you go back to Google. You don't go looking further into that website. So you want to have that specific information with that specific keyword on this one landing page. So it's very important to have landing page optimization done.
Is that new?
I would say it's becoming more of a trend in the past couple of years. So let's take a restaurant for example. A lot of times restaurants, they have a menu page. Instead of having a menu page, you want to have a brunch page, a breakfast page, a lunch page, dinner page, dessert page, drinks page. You want to have it categorized, so when people are looking for that, they find that specific thing, because Google's very smart now. If you look for a restaurant menu and it's 3 p.m., they're going to show you the dinner menu. They're very smart that way. So you want to have content that's localized and custom made for that specific keywords. Yeah, so your customers are busy. They need to find stuff, right away. They have very short attention spans. It was a couple slides ago, but people only have a 2-second attention span when it comes to websites. And another reason for having landing pages is it loads faster. In Japan and Korea, the internet speed is about 8 to 10 times faster than here in the US. But here in the US, your internet's so slow that it takes time to load. So having a lot of information, a lot of pictures, it's going to take longer to load. But if you have more condensed landing page optimizations, each keyword and each page loads faster. Okay, so marketing and SEO and PPCs, pay-per-click for Japan. Advertising is traditionally the same as here in the US. So you have pay-per-clicks, which is Google ads, Yahoo ads. Yahoo is still about 32%, which is quite big compared to other countries internationally. You have Facebook ads, Instagram, and banner ads is something that's quite unique in the Japanese market. Is a lot of popular websites will sell space within their site besides of Google. So one popular website is called Cookpad. It's a recipe site. It has about 6 million users per month. They sell specific sections within their site to advertise. So Cookpad is for recipes, so kind of like for You want to target something for the female audience who likes cooking. You want to place your ad there. Might be more effective than just doing Google. And of course, SEO is Okay, so of course, SEO is very important too. In Japan, this is hard to believe, but did you know that out of all the blogs in the world, 32% are in Japanese? Japanese love writing blogs. So it's a huge way to market your, especially to attract new customers, because you get to go in so much detail over content and information. It's a good way to capture new audiences. So business blogs are very important. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, keywords in Japanese. Anybody speak a little bit of Japanese? Like konnichiwa, sayonara type stuff, right? Okay. In Japanese, there's 3 written types of language. There's kanji, which is Chinese characters, and hiragana and katakana, which is different types of alphabet. So when you're marketing and doing keyword, you need to use the correct type or a combination of both to do marketing. You can't just put in English words into Google Translate and have a keyword come out. A lot of times that's not going to be correct. And a lot of times Japanese use different trendy words. A lot of Japanese words, about 50,000 right now, are based on other languages, meaning they take an English word or a Latin word or a Greek word and they kind of turn it into a Japanese word on their own. It's very confusing, but Japanese like doing this. One good example is financial institutions used to be, just financial, right? Some marketing guy came up with the idea to call it financial. So he just spelled it differently, but he marketed it differently for their bank. And they happen to be a large bank in Japan, so instead of typing in financial, everybody started typing in financial, which is really confusing. So the keywords are really hard to research in Japanese. When you have a website, I usually do about 75 to 100 keyword research for our English company. For Japanese ones, it tends to be about 250 because there's so many different variations of what the keyword can be about.
We'll talk about this later in marketing, but Kanzo brings up a good point. Don't rely on Google Translate. It just doesn't work for this sort of stuff. A one word maybe, but not a full sentence and definitely not a paragraph.
Okay, so all the big companies are already using pay-per-click and search engine marketing. So how do you compete with your budget? You can do that by using these tactics here. One is time of day. We talked about that before in transit during lunchtime. The big companies advertise 24 hours a day. With pay-per-click, you can advertise specific times. Just make sure you're using the right time difference. Yeah, I had a customer of mine who was only thinking everybody in the world shared Hawaii time, and they were advertising here in Hawaii time when everybody was sleeping in Japan. Location and region. You can do this for Japan too. You can either target metropolitan areas, rural areas, or only like Okinawa, only Hokkaido. You can be very specific in your targeting. Like let's say for like Hawaiian Airlines, they have direct flights to Fukuoka and Hokkaido. You don't want to be advertising all of Japan for those direct flights. You want to be advertising where those flights go. The obvious ones are age and gender. This is only for Facebook, but you can advertise for income-based. So let's say you're selling high-rise condominiums. You don't want to advertise to everybody. You want to try to specifically target people who have a higher income bracket. Okay, next slide, please. So the future of e-commerce. There's a lot going on now, but what's really going to change e-commerce in the future now that's happening is fulfillment centers, currency converter, and business admin apps. The first one is fulfillment center. This is actually a picture of Amazon's fulfillment center in Seattle. Anybody selling on Amazon here? No? Oh, okay. So you know how humbug it is to get stuff sent here and the time and everything, right? So the fulfillment center is, as you probably can tell, there's no people walking around. It's a bunch of robots and it's systemized. So the effectiveness about this here in the US domestically is they have fulfillment centers all across the country. And here in Hawaii, we don't benefit too much from it, but in the mainland, you get it within about 2 days. So if you order something, let's say in San Jose, the fulfillment center in LA already has your product and they send it out for you. But it has to be sent here and kept in a specific way. Unfortunately, internationally, they're not doing this yet. But in Japan, they have their own types of fulfillment center. I think Kuroneko Yamato has one, Rakuten has their own, and it's catching on in Japan too. So if you have products that you send, let's say, more than a couple dozen a month of specific product, instead of sending it each time here from Hawaii, it'll save you time and money. And also, the consumer loves getting it fast, you know. Half the time I read Amazon's review, they're not even talking about the product, they're talking about how it got shipped there. They're like, I had to wait an extra day, it didn't get here in 2 days, it got here in 3 days. But they never talk about the product, you know. They're talking about the method it was delivered. So this is a big aspect of, I think, online shopping now, is like how fast can they get it? And, you know, I don't want to sound too futuristic, but I think in the next probably 8 to 10 years in Seattle, they're probably going to have the first drone delivery by Amazon. So you're going to order it, it's going to get sent to you that day with a drone flying. Yeah, that's going to happen pretty soon.
I would imagine, though, Japan being a somewhat smaller geography, but also just very logistics-oriented
Yes.
economy, that it should be pretty easy to get a product within a day if you have a fulfillment center in Japan.
Yes, in Japan it'll be pretty fast. Yeah, just the fulfillment centers really they have mostly contracts based for local, domestic businesses. So it's hard to store your product if you're an international customer. Currency converters. Going back to the finance portion is, a dollar today is not 100 yen in Japan today. It changes all the time. The part you want to be straightforward with your users is just letting them know what the currency change is right now. And this is kind of a two-step thing. So the day they buy it is one thing. The day your credit card processes it is another thing. So let's say a dollar is 98 yen today. They buy it, but their credit card gets processed another day later, so it turns out to be 102 yen. So it's very confusing, but there's some processing merchants out there that are trying to close this gap. One example is a company called 2Checkout at the bottom. They don't have the best interface, but I think they have the best international agenda on mine right now. Is they have a currency converter on their website and also on their checkout time. So when you're checking out, the user gets to select which currency they want to check out with. So it helps them, breach the gap of the time difference in the currency. Yeah, I always like this picture. It's kind of Hawaiian business altogether. But the nice thing about IT is us IT guys, we're really lazy. We don't want to work hard. We want to work smart. And by doing that is you want to utilize every tool that's out there to make it work for you. So there's a lot of business admin apps out there that you can utilize. I'm not going to go through a whole list, but a few things that I like using is like Square Up Sale or Shopify app. The good thing about these guys is they have a lot of add-ons in there. So with Square Up, you can use things like appointment schedulers. They have an appointment booking system within Square that you can use. They also have staff management, time logins, so many things like this. And a lot of my IT customers now are small, mid-sized business owners who are a lot of times busy outside all the time. And I always tell them to turn on their computer and check stuff, but they're always so busy that they're like, can I do it on my phone? Can I do it on my phone? So if you can find something that works on your phone, that's great. So try to find business admin apps that can help you out and save time, but not to cut any corners. Turning on your desktop for a lot of these apps, they actually show more options and more menus when you turn it on your desktop. So you don't want to neglect that fact either. Before I close, I want to mention one thing. We've talked about today with financial institutions, legal lawyers saying that I don't know everything. You want to find a specialized person. I'm going to kind of say something that's going to sound cocky, but I do know everything when it comes to IT. It's just that I can't do everything. But the difference between probably your banker and your IT one is sometimes my mid to large size customers, they think they're being savvy by using multiple vendors, IT vendors. You know, one guy for marketing in Japan, one guy for development here in Hawaii, one mainland guy to do the English site and website, one translation guy in New York. And by the end of the day, they use so many vendors that they're not getting the right information and consulting they need to reach their final objective. So when it comes to IT, you're not going to be able to hire one guy to do everything. That's impossible. Same as in your bank or lawyer. But what you want to do is you want to find one guy to be the key person for this. The reason for this being is there's a lot of information and accounts when it comes to IT. You have your merchant account, you have your domain, you have your hosting, and people who don't have access to that can't see the whole picture. So you want to have one key person or an IT consultant where you have a good confidentiality agreement and have that person hire the third parties with your knowledge. That's the best way to go. You know, I've seen website projects that got so big with so many different companies, and the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing and end up spending more money, because if somebody at the very beginning said, look, if we use this guy, and do this, we can get it done in $10,000. But they end up using 5 different vendors and it costs $50,000. So that's my final advice I can give you is, you know, when there's a lot of elements and a lot of features out there now for IT, try to find one guy you trust, you can use, even if it's not me, but you know, that'll help you time and money in the long run.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any questions for Kanzo?
Yes.
Just kind of a question in detail about the way that the Japanese commute.
Okay.
That's interesting to me because,
Mhm.
you know, like in other countries, whether
Yes.
it's Spain or even in New York, so another country, the timing is different. So what would the timing for commuters look like in Japan? Are they traveling from 6 to 8 or 7 to 9? Do they take a lunch at a normal noon?
Yeah, I would say the Japanese business hours are very 9 to 5. You know,
It's very predictable, actually.
yeah. They're very punctual people. Yeah. So I would say when you're advertising, you can kind of go with the general majority, and you should be pretty comfortable with that time bracket. Yeah.
If you're standing by the door at noon in Japan, you're going to get run over. It works that punctually for lunch and everything. It's just set up that way. Now, some people have egregious commutes, 2 hours or more each way on the train, and they doze off and they snooze. But if I'm on a train or I'm on an airplane, what am I doing in the modern world? I'm playing on my phone, I'm playing on my iPad or something like that. So that's a good time to catch people, and hopefully they buy something from you during that time. But as Kanzo said, you've got to be able to close the deal pretty quickly because they don't have the attention span of the modern user just isn't there. Right. Sorry, next question.
Yes, sir.
What is the second number one shopping cart you visit, the top 3?
Oh, okay. The first one is just doing everything on your own server, own domain, and so on. The second one is using like Shopify or Wix.
I don't know. I mean, Rakuten was number 1.
Oh, Rakuten was number 1. Number 2 is Yahoo. Number 3 is Amazon right now. Yeah. Yes, sir.
We're a little behind. Do you mind if we take a break right now and then come back?
Okay.
So we do native Hawaiian-inspired home decor, and it's part of our branding is that it's made here in Hawaii.
Okay.
And so, do you think there'd be a value for us to send it from Hawaii? Do Japanese put a value on that? Like it's coming from Hawaii, not like fulfillment center in Japan.
Oh, not at all. The large travel agencies like JTB and HIS, they have a warehouse in Chiba Prefecture where they store all their macadamia nut chocolate and Kona coffee, and it just sits there in their warehouse. And Japanese businessmen, when they go on business trips, they order their gifts before they leave. Yeah. So they don't even buy when they're there. That's how efficient Japanese want to be. They don't want to carry with them. Yes. Yeah, it's actually at their waiting on their front doorstep when they get back. Yeah, they don't want to carry once they're here. Yeah. Yes.
Talk about translation and localization as
Uh-huh.
well as adjusting websites from one language to another and
Yes.
product. Is there, I mean, other than the fact you get to talk to someone in person,
Uh-huh.
a lot of people think that because it's IT, it doesn't matter if you're working with someone here, working somewhere in New York, working with someone in Osaka.
Uh-huh.
So if there, what is the value value to working with someone local versus outsourcing, and if there are good people, I mean, obviously other than you, for translating to Japanese or localizing here locally. Can you give some advice on that?
Oh, good question. I would say, okay, if you're comfortable with digital records and reading and writing long emails, I would say you can probably use somebody out of the state. But if you want more hands-on and in-person meetings, I would recommend using a local IT specialist. Yeah, because I would say that's the thing I can offer my clients the most is if they have some kind of trouble and they need help, they need quick suggestions on a marketing campaign they want. You know, if they email their IT guy in New York, you know, they might get bits and pieces of fractions of the information. Whereas me, I can set up a meeting with you and talk with you. Yeah, so I would say that's the benefit.
I would also add, if you're thinking of exporting to Asia, you have lots of people here locally that are native Japanese writers, Chinese writers, Korean writers, both types of Chinese, mainland or Taiwan Chinese. If you were exporting to Brazil, there's not a lot of Portuguese speakers here, right? There's not a lot of German speakers. I know a couple, but not a lot. But if you're really looking for Japanese, written Japanese, there's plenty of people here who can help. I mean, he's one of them. But if you need specific, industry-specific Japanese language, there's people here that can do that.
Oh, one
so
thing
you're lucky in that regard that you're here in the middle of the ocean.
Yeah, well, one thing to add on to what Rob just said was there's a lot of IT guys out there that say they speak the language, right? You have to be careful. When people speak, it doesn't mean they can write it. You know, so when it comes to website and keyword and marketing, they really need to read and write on a fluent level. You know, a lot of people speak it, but you can't write it. Like in Japanese, from 1st grade to 9th grade, you are taught 1,500 Chinese characters. And unless you learn that, you cannot even read a newspaper. So you have to turn 15 to read a newspaper in Japan. It's not just memorizing the alphabet like here in the US. Yeah, so even if you find a guy who's fluent in Japanese, make sure he can read and write. Same with Chinese and Korean. Yes, sir.
How confident are you, by language transfer apps?
Oh, not at all. Do not use the language transfer apps. They're kind of clunky and not working right. And a lot of times you get these like robot-sounding words. You know. Yes, ma'am. Oh, excellent point. Yeah, yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very true, especially when it comes to like medical terms, legal terms, even like products. If you have electronic products, it's good to have somebody who specializes in that industry.
Any further questions?
Oh,
Yeah, one
yes,
more.
ma'am.
Question
Sure.
regarding social media, and maybe you have said about it, I can't remember, but what is the usage of social media in Japan in terms of like Instagram?
Oh, okay. It's the same as here. It's just that the age bracket is kind of different. In Japan, Instagram's for younger people now, from about 15 to 25. 15 to about 34, and Facebook is finally catching on to people in their 40s now. So it's actually really big for people in their 40s and 50s now. Yeah. And Facebook is more male-oriented than female. Yeah. And in Instagram, you get both of them together. Yeah. And Twitter is still really big in Japan, but Twitter, people mostly follow famous people, and it's not so much individuals.
Yeah. Line?
Line is, yeah, but that's not so much social media, and it's it's mostly communication. Yeah, but it's a very everybody has Line. It's the biggest app in Asia actually right now. Yeah, probably combined with Korea, China, Japan, Taiwan, Line users exceed that of Twitter and Facebook here in the US.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much.